Hey everyone, Tactics here, and in today's video we have some exciting news with patch 9.0.5 going live on the PTR. Now this patch has a ton of changes, including things like covenant balance, class tuning, and the return of Valor Points, which I'm sure a lot of people will be quite happy about. Now I do want to note, because this is a PTR patch, all these are up for debate. They can be changed. This patch is probably going to be coming out sometime in March, so they have about a month to kind of change up any of these things as they see fit. So don't get too worried. This is all subject to further change. Now, with that said, if you enjoy this video, please make sure to like and subscribe to support the channel, and let's just get right into this post. Let's start with Valor Points, because I know a lot of people are interested in that. So they've seen a lot of feedback on the pros and cons, how there's less reward after the first few weeks, and their major goal is to get more rewards and make Mythic Plus in general feel more rewarding. So their plan for this is that when you start, you can upgrade your Mythic Keystone gear to eye level 200. When you complete all +5s in time, you can then move it up to 207. So that's all 8 dungeons on +5. You can move it up and upgrade your gear to eye level 207. Similarly, you get all +10s in time. The cap goes up to 213, and if you get all 15s in time, the cap goes up to 220. So it stops there at 220 and +15s in time. Now this is going to be a great change for the majority of the player base, I'd say. Obviously it's coming a little bit late in the tier, so it's going to help less people out. For example, personally, like this doesn't really affect me at all. There might be one piece of gear I have by the time this patch comes out that I can upgrade in this way. But honestly, for the vast majority of players, this is going to be a good change, and it's going to be a great change going into Season 2 specifically, of course, assuming that this is still in place at that point in 9.1. Now, what I would like to see, and I think there's an argument to be made, is if you complete all +20s in time, this goes up to an equivalent, for example, like 226 upgrades, and maybe something like Conquest or Raids have, where you get a 233 weapon slot. Now I know that's going to be controversial. A lot of people aren't going to be happy with that, but I think in terms of if you're looking at the amount of players that actually complete that kind of content, there's significantly less completing +20s right now than are completing, for example, 2400 rating in PvP. That gives you the exact same rewards as what I just mentioned, and I think a lot of that is not so much in difficulty, but I think it's a lot in participation. I think Mythic Plus has problem with participation above +15s because there's no reason to, right? You don't get any benefit besides, hey, I did that, right? So even just adding an achievement for +20s in time, cosmetic rewards would be great, but frankly, I think moving this up by 6 eye level for +20s and giving you the chance of better weapons or upgrading better weapons, I think that's a pretty good adjustment that could maybe be made in 9.1. I know this is coming a lot earlier than people expected, right? A lot of people weren't expecting Valor in a mid-patch. They were expecting it to come in 9.1, maybe, if it even returned at all. So I'm glad it's coming earlier than expected. I would like to see that one little change, though. From there, we have a ton of changes. I will post a link to this document down in the description if you guys want to take a look at it for yourself. But let's start with Covenant abilities. So the big one here, Fleshcraft, massive changes. Fleshcraft is looking real nice now. So it's now a 40% max health shield. That's up from 20%. The channel is now 3 seconds instead of 4 seconds. And while channeling, you have a 30% DR while channeling. That's huge alone. On top of this, for you Mythic Plus players, moving near an enemy's corpse automatically, passively consumes their essence and reduces Fleshcraft's cooldown by 1 second. This ability got a huge overhaul. It went from being fairly lackluster, right? You do it like on pull, and then you don't really do it unless you have, like if you're in Plaguefall, you can do it. You can sneak one in during a Prideful if it's the only thing happening. And aside from that, I don't think you really can cast it aside from the beginning of a dungeon or on pull in raids. Now, I mean, even in raids now, right? Think about Sludge Fist Pillars, right? Channeling this, get that 30% DR for a Sludge Fist Pillar. Basically, any individual big damage hits, you can now have any Necrolord player just channel a Fleshcraft, and that's a ton of DR, right? From there, we have a ton of small tuning, but then we also have 2 reworks. So the first rework is Fodder to the Flame, which I think I have here. So it's completely changed now. It's now a passive, totally passive ability. So your damaging abilities have a chance to call forth a demon from the Theater of Pain for 25 seconds. Throw Glaive kills it if you throw Glaive at it, causing it to explode, dealing damage to nearby enemies, and healing you for 20% of your max health. Explosion deals reduced damage beyond 5 targets. This is going to be interesting. It's going to be dependent on the proc rate to see how good this is. But, I mean, I could definitely see this competing with the new Fleshcraft in AoE. That would be interesting for Vengeance. I don't know, though. The Kyrian Sigil is very, very strong. But as you'll see, actually, Kyrian Sigil was slightly nerfed here. So the Repeat Decree. So not the Sigil itself, but the conduit associated with the Sigil was nerfed slightly. So what happened here is it now went down from a base level of 25% to 15%, and then it also got its scaling hit down to 1.5% per level from 2.5% per level. So it's going to be significantly worse. Here at max rank, it's 36% increase rather than 60%. So it's a pretty significant decrease there. The other change they had was Fell Defender. It no longer is Fiery Brand. It's now Fell Devastation. I'm going to have to wait and see the actual scaling on this, but I'm going to be honest, I don't know if this is a nerf. I think at first glance, you see Fiery Brand, right? The synergy they had with the Fiery Brand Lego and their whole Fiery Brand reduction build and spreading build. But honestly, a Fell Devastation cooldown reduction, that's pretty good, right? You're always taking Demonic anyways, right? Demonic is a good spell. So you're taking Demonic, more Fell Devastations is just higher Demonic uptime, which is just like unkillable time for Vengeance Demon Hunters. So at first glance, it seems like a nerf, right? Because of the synergy being taken away, but I'm not sure it is with Fell Devastation being as strong as it is. From there, we also had the Death Knights. So Death Knights saw a slight buff to Death's Due. So there's no overall power increase here in terms of the total power you're getting, but you're now going to get to that power faster because you're now getting 2% of your total, a max of 8% per stack instead of 1%. So it's going to take you half the time to get that fully stacked up. So it just reduces the ramp of the ability a bit, which I think was definitely needed. Shackle also saw a buff. It's now an 8% up from 5% damage reduction, and then it also saw a sizable damage buff. So it's generally just a better option. I think obviously for DPS DKs, you're still probably not really looking at either of these, but there's a chance Blood's now much happier with these. But the Venthyr ability on Blood is just really, really nice. So it's hard to choose that these options when you know that the Venthyr runic power generation is right there. Aside from that, we have Adaptive Swarm. So Adaptive Swarm saw a decent buff as well, actually. Sizable buffs to the healing, sizable buffs to the damage, and even the damage amp saw a 5% increase. So this is looking very, very good, especially with the Fleshcraft changes. As a Guardian Druid right now who's Necrolord, this is looking very, very good for like single target DPS. So lots of raid situations still be good. Obviously in AoE it's still not the greatest, but having Fleshcraft be that DR now combined with these changes makes it a lot more interesting to use. There was also a buff to the Conduit for the Venthyr ability for all druids, and this is going to be just a crit chance increased up to 0.8% per stack from 0.5%. So again, that's a sizable change. I don't think it changes much for anybody because in general, I mean, you weren't taking this Conduit, I don't think, at all, because it just wasn't worth it, right? You only have 2 potencies, and the Berserk one for Guardian was just better than this, and then I don't think that Boomkins or Ferals or Resto Druids even wanted to be Venthyr at all, right? So I think the only one really looking at this was Guardian, and they would just rather the Berserk one. So it's a nice change. It needed the buff. Of course, the scaling also went up slightly, 0.8% from 0.5, but I don't think it's going to change much. Hunters also saw a change. Here they are. So they saw a buff to Death Chakram, which is their Necrolord ability. A decent overall buff. It's 25%-ish buff there to the Death Chakram total damage. And they also saw a very, very sizable buff to the Flayed Shot ability from Venthyr. So it had a duration buff on top of the damage buff, on top of making Killshot deal 24% damage when you get a proc in this way. And I also believe it's focus cost was reduced. Yeah, it was reduced to 0 from 10. So overall, that's a pretty significant buff to the Venthyr ability, but I am not sure it's actually going to do anything because Wild Spirits it's an insane ability, man. Wild Spirits is such a good burst ability. This could, obviously, I think it's going to pull ahead in single target, right? Because that's not really where Wild Spirit shines. But if there's any kind of cleave, any kind of AoE, obviously Mythic Plus, right? Wild Spirits is just the best option by far. From there, we also had changes to mages. So, their Necrolord ability saw a buff. 5-second duration increase, 20 to 25 seconds. And your spell damage increase has been increased to 15% from 10%. So, nice changes there. Venthyr was buffed for everyone but Frost, because I think Frost is actually currently using Venthyr as their best. Or if they're not using Venthyr because they're all fire mages, that could be a thing too. But so this was buffed for Fire and for Arcane. So Arcane, instead of 4% mana, this now grants you clear casting, and Fire, it's now a 6-second Fire Blast cooldown reduction from 4 seconds. So in general, just making this more appealing to the other mage specs. Radiant Spark also saw a very sizable buff to the damage, both the initial portion and the dot damage. So that also is just basically this whole entire 9.0.5 patch is, for the most part, them trying to make Covenant abilities more attractive rather than less attractive. I think the only one that actually got hit with a nerf was that Kyrian Demon Hunter one, but of course that wasn't a nerf directly to it. It was a nerf to the Conduit, but it's essentially the same thing. And what they've done otherwise is they've just buffed pretty much every other Covenant that wasn't being used. So this is a good way to balance these, I think. Make them all, bring them up to the same level rather than bring them down to the same level, and I'm very happy with this kind of balancing. Continuing on, not Shadow Priest, sorry, but this is going to be a big change for Shadow Priest possibly, but this is all priests in general. The Night Fae ability got buffs. Increases the cooldown recovery rate of your target's major abilities by 150% up from 100%. So, this is an interesting change. Basically, what I think this works out to is that 3-minute cooldowns can now become 2-minute cooldowns if you have a priest using their fairy on you. Very interesting. So, this has a lot of implications for especially high levels, like mythic, like non-mythic rating in general, but like cutting edge mythic rating, world first stuff. You can do some weird stuff with this. For example, right, Boomkin's Celestial Alignment, you can line it up with every single Convoke. That's big, right? And there's plenty of classes where that works for you. You can further reduce the cooldown of Combustion on Fire Mages. That's big. Obviously, for the general player, you're not going to want to constantly be giving away your own cooldown reduction, right? Like if you're a Shadow Priest, you can line up Void Form with PI now, right? Because you can get Void Form down to a 1 minute, I believe, and then you can line that up with every other PI, right? So that's really good for yourself too. But of course, if you're looking at the highest level, it's almost never going to be the case where it's best to use this on yourself, right? You're going to want to use this on someone else who can make better use out of it for the cutting edge. And it's interesting. This could make some very interesting comps and cooldown abilities combinations for higher level play, and I'm interested in seeing that. This is what I'm excited about. I'm sure Shadow Priests and as a DPS spec isn't really happy if they have to give away their damage, but it's very interesting to me. Now the other thing, they also saw a couple legendary buffs. So Cauterizing Shadows, the Shadow Word Pain expiring healing people, that got a 20% increase on the healing. And then I believe the Kiss of Death, so Shadow Word's death cooldown is now 12-second reduction instead of an 8-second reduction. So those two little buffs there to their legendaries, as well as this buff to the Night Phase, what the priest got. I will be watching this. I'm not sure this is going to go live, I'm going to be honest. We'll see how this goes, but this is a pretty substantial buff to the Night Fae for all priests. Moving on, we have some Shaman buffs to their covenants, in particular Fae Transfusion. So a sizable buff to both the initial damage as well as the healing. So the healing here double dips, of course, because it's a % of the damage, and the damage is doing more, and you're getting a higher % of the damage as healing. So this could be interesting. It's going to be hard for it to compete with Primordial Wave or the Chain Harvest. Those are two pretty strong abilities, but this is going a good way to help. Primordial Wave also saw a buff for enhancement specifically. Don't freak out too much. This does not affect Resto or Ellie. This is just for enhancement, I believe. It looks like, yeah. So yeah, if you see the changes at the bottom there, only the enhancement number has changed, not the elemental, not the restoration, who are already happy with this ability, just enhancement. Vesper Totem though saw a pretty big buff. I think it's a 25% buff to both the damage and the healing. So that's significant, right? That is a significant boost in throughput, and I'd be interested in seeing if this now gets used. I'm not a big Shaman player, but I will definitely be putting this by some Shaman players and seeing how it works. But it's interesting for sure. I think this could see some play now. Moving on from that, we have Warlocks. Impending Catastrophe got some buffs, both to the initial portion, where they deals targets in their path, as well as the Shadow Dot. This might make that a little bit more usable for Warlocks. I'm not sure this is going to change too much. I'm not sure how much damage the Covenant abilities for Warlocks are dealing overall right now, but this isn't a huge benefit. So I'm inclined to believe that the current top Covenants are going to remain the best. The last change we have is another rework, guys. So for Warriors, your Necrolord ability was also reworked. So Conqueror's Banner is now a 400 mastery, 30% move speed increase to you and your two nearest allies. And it also prevents your move speed from being reduced below 100% for 15 seconds. And it was reduced to a 2-minute cooldown. It also grants some passive rage generation. So again, like with the Shadow Priest change, or not Shadow Priest, but Priest change for Night Fae, this is also something interesting. For example, that same Boomkin scenario I put you guys in, the Celestial Alignment getting out of 2 minutes, usable with Convoke. Now on top of that, you could also give him 500 mastery for every single one of those Celestial Alignment Convoke bursts. That's a lot of damage, and obviously it's not something you're going to see in your average guild, right? Your average players, they're not really going to use this ability like that. But for the top end guilds, right, the guys pushing world first, this could be a super interesting combo, right? I don't know if DPS warriors are ever going to want to use this, just because Condemn is so good. But Prot warriors could be on the rise, right? Prot warriors, right, they're known for scaling. They're super good at scaling, right? They have really good secondary stats. All four, I think, are very good for them. And as we get more stats, Prot warriors are going to get better and better. And you add on this really good utility buff now, basically, right? They'll get the mastery too, but it's also going to be pretty solid in utility if you need 2-minute burst for things, which is a very, very important damage type. And this could bring Prot warriors into like mandatory zone. So it'd be interesting to see if this goes live the way it is, if it gets reworked again, if it gets nerfed to the ground, we'll see. But that is the state it is in right now. Now, aside from that, we have some smaller buffs. So Rejuvenation for Resto Druids saw a small buff. This isn't going to change anything for Resto Druids. This isn't really their problem. As similar with Monk, they saw a very, very small mana regen, or mana cost, sorry, buffs. So Renewing Mist and Vivify, small nerf to the amount of mana they need. So this is a net buff, sorry, for Mistweavers there. But again, that is a small problem, but this didn't do nearly enough to address that problem. And the biggest problem people like Resto Druids, people like Mistweaver Monks, people like Holy Priests have is that they don't bring damage reduction, right? They have the individual, Resto Druids anyways, have the individual, which is good, and which is why they're kind of like a bubble healer class. But Mistweaver and Holy Priest, right, they don't bring anything other than throughput, right? Holy Paladins, they've got Ashen Hollow, which is insane for throughput, right? 30 seconds. On a 4-minute cooldown, yes, but it's absolutely insane. And then on top of that, they have the DR in Aura Mastery, right? That's one of the best healer cooldowns in the game. Right? You just prevent the damage. And then you have Disc Priests, which of course have the Absorbs, they have Barrier, and then you've got Resto Shamans who have Spirit Link, and then insane throughput on top of that, right? It's just going to be hard as one of those specs to actually get into to be viable enough for the top end. Of course, if you're talking about the middle end, I mean, even high end guilds, I'm talking about like the highest level here, the world first pushers, right? You need that damage reduction, with the exception of a fight like Sun King where you want the throughput, right? For lower end guilds, right, this is going to be fine. You can use any healer you want. You can use any tank you want. You can use any DPS you want, right? You'll kill what you need. But in general, I don't think these buffs really address the problems with Resto Druid or Mistweaver Monk. Paladins, guys, they also saw a Holy Shock mana increase, so a slight hit there, but that's not going to be the end of the world for them. I don't know if they really feel it that much. And then Priests, Spirit Shell was nerfed down, so it went down from 100% of the healing creates an absorbed shield to 80%. I think this is a very, very good nerf. So Spirit Shell was like 100% pick rate pretty much in raids. You're now still probably going to pick it in the vast majority of cases, but the only time you don't pick it is when there's like you're using Spirit Shells to heal sustained damage rather than a burst of damage, right? So now if you need raw throughput, you're not going to pick Spirit Shell. You have other options on that row. But I think this was needed. I think Disc Priest, right? They're gonna this shield is going to get pretty oppressive for other healers as you move on. Obviously, that's not the biggest issue, right? You just want to heal as much as you can and kill the boss. But like this is going to make Disc Priest very, very mandatory. I think if it stayed at 100% as we move on in the expansion, this is going to get better and better. And so I think it needed the nerf now. I wouldn't call it overpowered now. I think it's good now. And I think it's still good post this nerf, which means that this nerf in general was a good way to nerf that ability. Aside from that, in terms of general stuff, there isn't too much. Small buff to Lightning Shield for Shamans, and actually a decent nerf to Malefic Rapture for Affliction Locks. I believe this was... Actually, let me double check how much this was exactly. Yeah, that's pretty sizable nerf there on the actual spell power scaling. That's what, like a 20-ish% nerf on that. So that's pretty significant. And I think that this could actually kind of push a different Warlock spec into the light for 9.1, depending on how this lasts. But we'll see how that goes in general for Warlocks. But I believe that is it for the current patch notes that we have for PTR for 9.0.5. And again, as I mentioned at the beginning, this is all up for debate. It can be changed by Blizzard at any time. They've got a whole month to work this out. Stuff could be added, stuff could be subtracted. So don't worry if you don't see your class here. If you see something that you think is unwarranted, it is all up for debate by Blizzard, and they can change it at any point. So keep that in mind. But that is it for this video, guys. Please remember, like and subscribe if you enjoyed it to support the channel. As always, I will be continue uploading my other videos. In particular, I think I have a few more plus 15 walkthrough videos to go over. And then I do have some other interesting videos to post in the future, so keep an eye out for those. But again, thank you all for watching, and I will see you all in the next video.